record and go straight to screen share. All right. Erev Tov. Afternoon, good evening, everybody. Um, just as a brief review, last week I gave a bit of an overview introduction. We learned some terms that are going to come up many, many times. We're going to see them again tonight. And because I kind of went through it quickly as we go through the terms, I'll give a little bit more background on what they mean. What I would like to do tonight is the first six psukim in Mishle, which we read kind of quickly last week. I'm going to reread them now, and a little bit slower this week because it's not just part of the introduction. We're going to start looking. This first chapter basically will break down into the first six psukim, what the book is about. Then we're going to see a couple of comments, statements from Shlomo HaMelech, and some words that sometimes people use to dissuade or persuade us to do things we're not supposed to do. And that's hopefully we'll get to all that tonight. I also will say clearly that the first few psukim might be a little tedious because it's just like the mission statement of the book. And it's important to understand what he's trying to tell us. And we'll start getting to some lessons after we get past these first few psukim. Actually, the first pasuk that we'll come to after that, pasuk Zayin, will be a pasuk that many of you already know. And as I mentioned last week, there are many, 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 many psukim in Mishle that you're going to find. Oh, I knew that, just didn't know some Mishle. Okay, I'm going to start reading and translating. Mishle Shlomo ben David, Melech Yisrael. By the way, if you have text, that's great. Otherwise, just feel free to follow along on the screen. I may not translate exactly as you see in front of you. Mishle Shlomo ben David, Melech Yisrael. These are the Proverbs Mishalim of Shlomo, son of David, who was king of Israel, referring to himself. He's introducing himself, who he is as the author. Chochma, Ladat Chochma umusar. In order to make known, he's saying, I am using this book now to make known words of wisdom and discipline. Right now, we're going to explain this word musar as discipline. Lahavin imrei bina, and make words of understanding discernible. Words of understanding. We're going to come back to that to understand these terms shortly. But to be able to dive and delve deeper into words that on the surface may seem rather benign, but have a lot of depth to them. Lakachat musar haskel. Now you notice the word, we said this last week also, you have the word musar, ladat chochma musar. Now you have this something called musar haskel. There's a significant difference between the two. Musar we translate here as what? As discipline. Musar haskel is discipline for success. I don't know if I particularly care for that. But we'll just use that for right now, is that say to accept wise discipline. Okay, what's the difference? We will eventually see. Latet laftaim orma, to give even the simple person shrewdness. Now, what does that mean? What's the simple person? Again, I know I keep repeating myself, but I want to just mention these psukim and then go back and touch on the translations and a little bit more depth of what these people are. A simpleton doesn't mean a fool. A simpleton means someone who doesn't have knowledge, but to be able to give them, I will use the term street smarts. The nar dat uzima, and for the young, knowledge and foresight. So he starts to say to this book off by saying, look, I want you to know something. Very often you buy a book, you go to the bookstore, if you walk into the bookstore, or you look online, you turn the book to the back or the inside cover to see what it's about. And part of that is, who is the audience? Whereas if I pick up a book that looks interesting and I see it's really way above my head, or it's like, okay, this is Aleph Bet and I don't really need this book, or it's not of any interest, then I'm not going to look at it. So Shlomo HaMelech is starting the book off by telling us this book is for everybody, whether they're a chacham, whether they're petty, someone who's a fool, maybe if they're someone who it's a fool / someone without knowledge, a child, a young person, a clean slate. This book is going to be for everybody. Now, how is that possible? How is that possible? Okay, so again, we talked last week about the concept of a quote self-help book. So if you look at many of the self-help books in bookstores, you'll find that they gear themselves either in very broad terms, very broad strokes to all kinds of populations, or they focus on a certain aspect of the individual and they hone in on that. Shlomo is telling us that every person can be able to find something in here. This is very similar to the introduction of, obviously it's thousands of years later, the book of Tanya, when the Admor HaZaken, the Alter Rebbe, the author of Tanya, tells who the book is for and what it will do for them. So it's a similar idea. Now he takes it another step and says over here, Yishma Chacham Yosef Lekach, a person who is a Chacham. He translates here in English as discerning man, but let's just right now use the word wise. The Chacham should take lessons from this, or take lessons and add to what he's learned. Navon tachbulot yikneh, but someone who is already wise. Oh, sorry, he says here the wise man. I read the wrong line. So the wise man will hear and gain more wisdom, and discerning man will learn to be adroit. I don't like that word at all, but basically what he's saying in these two psukim is a person might say, look, this book is for other people. They take a Mesilat Yesharim type of book, or Chovot HaLevavot, self-improvement books, and say, it's for that. Say, no. Even if you're a Chacham, you can take a lesson from where I will teach you, and you can add your own lessons from it. In addition to that, someone who's a Navon, someone who already has the ability, Lahavin Davar Mitoch Davar, someone who has the ability to already understand from the writing, from the inflection, from the discussion, already has a deeper meaning. Even that person is able to figure out tachbulot. And I'm going to leave that word a little, he says adroit. I'll give you a better word when we come to that we look at a slide. In addition to that, what are we going to do in this book? Lavin mashal umlitza. We're going to understand proverbs and melitza. Melitzot are what he calls here in English epigrams. I don't know what an epigram is. But basically, it's another form of information given in an indirect way. Another way, I'll just leave as epigram for now, whatever that means. Divrei Chachamim v'chidotam. Now, we talked about last week also that in addition to these parables and proverbs and stories, there are also going to be chidot. Chidah is a riddle. And the riddles will help us to understand even a deeper level and be able to apply to many places in life. And he concludes these psukim and tells us, Yirat Adonai Reshit Da'at, Chochma u'musar evilim bazu. Meaning, fear of Hashem, Yirat Hashem, is the beginning of knowledge, and someone who's a skeptic will scorn wisdom and discipline. Let's understand what that last pasuk means first. Then we're going to go back and talk about some of these terms. Again, it's important to, when you learn something in Tanakh, to also, if you have something more, quote, modern, I'm going to talk about something from the 18th century, the 1700s, many of you learned and have learned Mesilat Yesharim. It talks about, again, in the beginning of the book of Mesilat Yesharim, he wants to help us. The Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto wants to help us. He said, but listen, the people who just, everything's a joke. Like, come on, the rabbis all make this stuff up and all. These people despise wisdom. They despise Musar. What is the first stepping stone to understanding that we really do have to grow and we have to learn? We have to know, this isn't just about learning Torah, by the way. Remember that. This is about learning how to be a human being, how to be a good Jew, how to be a good parent, especially parent, a spouse, a child, everything. It's going to be filled with everything. And absolutely to be, of course, how to be an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. And he starts out by telling us at the beginning of the book, Yirat Hashem Reshit Da'at, that fear of Hashem. Now, Yirah doesn't mean, as we talked about last week, does not mean just, oh my gosh, he's going to punish me. That's the very basic level. That especially as a child, you don't do something because you're afraid you're going to get punished. But maybe as you grow up, you don't do it because you respect your parent. So here too, when a person's young and immature, it doesn't mean age-wise, but in their growth towards Hashem, they may not do something because they're afraid of the onesh or the punishment. The higher level of that is the being in awe of God and saying, I don't want to do something against Avinu Sheba Shamayim, our Father in heaven. But he says that the very first stepping stone in knowledge, in chokhmah, in wisdom, is having that yirat Hashem. Now, we'll talk about a couple of these words that we've been using. That this word chokhmah, musar, we're going to translate not just as discipline, but also ethical teaching. I'm sure you've heard of what's called the Musar movement. The Musar movement was started by Rabbi Saul Salanter, who really brought back Michal's work and brought that to be one of the main books of the Musar movement. But it talks about Musar, in this case, is talking about perfecting one's character traits. There's a very big difference between acquiring knowledge or learning how to navigate life or how to be a good parent versus how to work on your midot. Each one is its own item. Another word we have here is musar haskel. In other words, we said musar, and then musar haskel over here. What does wise discipline mean? It means once you have acquired and start growing in your discipline, in your ethical growth, then you can apply it to grow with it. In other words, you make, and from the basic steps, as you know you're not supposed to do X, and you've started to practice that, and as you start to treat the person or yourself that way, you realize, wait, there's a lot more here. It's from the word sechel, or your intellect, your common sense, that once you have been taught this, you now know what to add to it. And this is also what Shlomo is telling us, that it's not just a book I'm going to spoon feed you everything, which he will be spoon feeding us a lot, but then we're supposed to take that as homework as well. Peti. He says it's to give ta'im orma, to give the simple, to endow them with shrewdness. Okay, what are the peti? Now, usually a peti is a fool. Okay, so many of you know the expression shomer ta'im Hashem, that God watches over fools. You'll hear that sometimes someone does something just plain stupid, and it just, what were you thinking? And it still works out. The person doesn't get hurt, or the person does whatever. And under your breath, very often you hear people munder, shomer ta'im Hashem. God just watches over fools. There's a story that I heard directly from the person telling the story by Rabbi Yisrael Reisman. I know I've mentioned his name many times over the years. I have tremendous respect for him. He is the man who has the world's largest shiur, over thousands of people in his class every Motzei Shabbat, from after Sukkot until Pesach. I've told the story before. I'm not getting into this, how it started, but in any case, he teaches thousands of people. And he tells a story about himself when he was in high school, I think it was. And he wasn't the Rabbi Yisrael Reisman yet. He was still a kid. And he thought he knew some Tanakh. And his Rebbe came over to him, and this is when they could still smoke, I guess, in the Beit Midrash. I'm sure plenty of places you still can. And his Rebbe came over, and he was smoking. And Rabbi Reisman was, at that time, was just Yisrael Reisman, was asking to him, saying, like, how come you're smoking? Because isn't it dangerous for you? So the Rebbe said, well, he gave him some answer. And Rabbi Yisrael Reisman, thinking that he was giving him a compliment, said, Shomer Ta'im Hashem. God watches over fools. So the Rebbe explained to him, you don't realize what you did, but you just insulted me. He explains, Rabbi Reisman felt horrible, but he never forgot the story. So you have to also be careful how you use the term. So here he's not using this term necessarily as a person who's a fool, but someone who's simple, who's lacking ability to, let's call him a simpleton. He can be swayed towards the evil ways. And we're going to see in a few psukim from now how that comes into play. But he's going to give him orma. What's orma? So that's shrewdness, cleverness. Again, it's the ability to persuade someone to not do something wrong. How are you going to give this person a tool? Probably the best example I can give you would be somebody who is involved in something that is due to peer pressure. And everyone's doing it. Everyone's, ditching class. Everyone's going to the movies. Everyone's whatever they're doing. So peer pressure is very strong. To give a tool to someone who's a petty, someone who is a simpleton, he can be swayed one way or the other. Shlomo says, I'm going to give you a tool for something like that also. Okay, so these are the first few psukim, and I want to talk a little bit about them. Some of the things that we did. Now, again, this is just, like I say, his introduction to the book, that he's going to be using parables. We talked about last week. that the Rambam and the Malbim and many others explain a simple truth, which is why didn't Shlomo HaMelech, being the smartest of all men, just say, okay, here's the stuff you need to know, A, B, C, D. Again, because for some people that can get very boring. It's not necessarily enticing and engaging. When you say, look, I have a story to tell you, I have a parable to tell you, I have a riddle for you, that already draws the person in. And that's one of the reasons, of course, that he writes in this way. He divides his book up, as we talked about last time, into three main sections. The first deals with, in general, about chokhmah, wisdom. The second part will deal with musar, or these ethical, moral disciplines. And the third will deal with Torah. Now, it's interesting that he chose that particular order. We won't understand until we get near the end of the book, a long time from now, why he chose to do it in that particular. Why not put Torah first? But again, the first section is about Chokhmah, from the Chacham Mikol Adam, from the wisest of all men. Shlomo teaches these mishalim to inform people that you need to work at this. This isn't something that's just automatically to come naturally to a person. We know that when it comes to education, whether it's secular or Torah education, it doesn't just fall down from the sky and educate you. You don't just all of a sudden wake up one day and know physics, or one day know all of Sefer Breshit by heart. It doesn't work that way. You have to work at it. He's telling us that these proverbs, these mishalim, you have to work at them. You have to make sure you learn to toil in chokhmah, just like you in Torah, to toil in musar, ethical work as well, in bina, in understanding one thing, bina, davin davar mitoch davar, to understand one thing from another. And then he tells us in this pasuk here, it says, when we say this expression, lakachat musar haskel. If you look in the English, actually this one's a good one. It says, for acquiring the discipline of success. What is the difference between to listen to somebody or to acquire what they said? I can get up and speak, and I can try and teach something. And you could sit there and listen and go, I've taught enough, especially kids, over the last 26, 27 years, that I can be in the middle of explaining something and they're going, And I said, you don't have a clue what I'm saying. They go, I don't understand anything. It's this look you get on your face, not you, but a person gets on their face like they're somewhere else, or they have no idea, they cannot follow what you're saying. So lakachat musar haskel is not just to learn these things, but it's actually to accept them, to make them a part of you. We know that in the Torah, when it talks about marriage, it says ki yikach ish isha. There's a concept of kicha. We also know, for example, when Avram Avinu buys Marat HaMachpelah, it's called. It has the expression kicha there as well. And those two, the Gemara makes it a connection between the two Masachet Kiddushin. But lakachet is not just to hear it; it's not just to learn it; it's to accept it. It's to internalize it, to make it a part of you, and that's what his goal is in this part as well. The Vilna Gaon tells us something interesting. He said the word haskel, musar haskel. You're going to come across this word haskel many times in the book. He said that word is connected to a word maskil. There's a tilim. There's also psukim. Vayi David lachol derchav maskil. And David was successful in all of his ways. So he said this word here, that the purpose of lakachat musar, the purpose of acquiring this ethical approach to life, is not just to have it, to do the right thing, but it's a recipe for success. Let's give you a practical example. I'll tell you a story. As we go through Mishle, I guess I'll tell more stories than usual. Another true story. I don't remember which department store this is, but it's a true story that happened somewhere in the 60s. There was one of these big department stores, privately owned, but a very large department store. No, it was a furniture store. And there was a little old lady who walked into the one department, and one of the salespeople came by and said, "Can I help you?" She said, "No, not at the moment." And he just walked away. Another one came by, just said, "You looking for anything?" "No," walked away. And another guy came along and said, noticed that she was a bit frail, and said, "Would you like to sit down? If you're looking for something, maybe I can help you. But meantime, would you like to sit down?" So thank you so much. Um, can I get you something to drink? Maybe a cup of water. That'd be very nice. Turns out that the woman owned the store. She wasn't doing this as a test. She was actually going through to see what customers would see during the day. She ended up promoting the man to store manager. He was a salesman. He moved right away, pretty much up the chain pretty fast. Two different salespeople, three different salespeople. How this person was treated her as a person, not just as another body coming through the department that may or may not make a sale or be a sale, was something that increased that chance of that person to be successful. And we've all seen this in our lives, that how you treat people, um, how you work with the disciplines in life will absolutely make a difference in your level of success. And some of that success and some of that knowledge is going to also be given to the ta'im, the simpletons. The simple person, give him shrewdness. That kind of a person who can be allowed to be easily swayed by the evil inclination. It also means if they're easily swayable, if that's such a word in English, if they're easily swayable, it also means that they could be swayed for the good. Usually what we do, and Shlomo is pointing this out this right now, is we think that someone who's easily swayed always is negative. Oh, he can be talked into anything. Well, yes, and it could be something negative, something bad, but at the same time, it could be, well, that means he's willing to listen and maybe take on something that maybe he wasn't willing to before. And therefore, listening to some of these things in Sefer Mishle will be able to do that for him as well. And Lanar Dat Mzima, a youth with knowledge and design. What does that mean? Remember, in these first few psukim on these words here right now. Whoops, what did I just do? Try that again. These words here, Lanar Datum Zima, for the young with knowledge and foresight. He's telling us again that a nar, according to Rashi's comment, is, and by the way, I'm not putting Rashi on the screen or they'll go as we go through it, and when we get into the meat, so to speak, of some of these Mishalim, I'll show you some in writing, some of the commentary. Right now, in the introduction to the book, I don't believe it's just going to be a distraction. He's saying also a na'ar. A na'ar is a person who is young, but it also is a person who is lacking, as Rashi says, lacking chokhmah. You could take somebody who's 8 years old, someone who's 9 years old. They could be intelligent, but wisdom is something else. In other words, knowledge and wisdom are different things. I can know how to count to 10 in Russian. I do. I used to be able to speak fairly well. I can know that. That does not mean I can read Russian literature. It doesn't mean I can understand when Dostoevsky is saying this in this book and this in that book, that he's trying to explain to me something that is part of his philosophical outlook. I can't do that. I have the knowledge, but not necessarily the wisdom in that. Same thing is true when it comes to Torah. You may have the knowledge. You know that there are Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Doesn't mean you know to understand what Rashi is saying on the pasuk. So he's saying that even someone like that, who's also, many of these people are clean slates and some are not. They have already writing on their slate and it has to be erased and redone. But even a novice to be given da'at, to be given knowledge, and mizima, shrewdness or design. Yishma chacham Yosef lekach. Next line over here. Adding by yourself. A person should never be, let me change that. A person should never plateau. You should never plateau when it comes to Torah. Never be satisfied with what you know. So you know what? And I talked about this a few years ago on Shabbat Shuvah about there's no such thing as spiritual retirement. I have heard from so many people over the years, oh, I learned that in my year in seminary. That was my year after high school in yeshiva, 2 years. as if that was the whole thing the rest of my life. I don't have to add to that. That's a huge mistake. It's saying here, Yishma Chacham Yosef Lekach. One of the hallmarks of a Chacham is that they want to take what they learn and add more lessons and into it more from it as well. And that's lakachat, to take as well. Tachbulot. I mentioned before, navon tachbulot yikneh. What does he say in English? The discerning man will learn to be adroit. Okay, fancy word. What's it mean? Ibn Ezra tells us something amazing, and we're going to take a look at a midrash right. There's the one slide I will show you. I have it here. No, that was last week's. Oh, let me make this bigger. Okay. This is Ibn Ezra says that the word tachbulot, usually in modern Hebrew, tachbulot are not tricks, but things you can use to get your way. Could be something like that. Okay, in any case. But what are tachbulot? What does Ibn Ezra tell us? He says the word tachbulot comes from the word chevel. Chevel means a rope. He says, and he bases it on a midrash. It's Midrash Rabbah in Breshit. Davar Vayigash elav Yehuda. The beginning of Parshat Vayigash, it says, and he quotes the pasuk in Mishle, a pasuk, not our pasuk, in Perek Kaf. Mayim amukim etza belev ish. Like deep water is counsel in the heart of man. Now, this is a classic example of something we're going to come across dozens and dozens of times as we move through the book of Mishle. It's like, it sounds fancy, but what does it really mean? Like, deep water is counsel in the heart of the man. What's the connection between deep waters and giving eitzah or giving counsel? It says like this: the ve'er amukah, it's comparable to a deep well. Meleat sonen, it's filled with cold water. Vayu me'mehat sonenim v'yafin, and its waters were cold and good. But nobody was able to drink from it. I mean, it's all the way down in a well. They're all the way on top of the well, and the water's down there, and there's no one they can't drink it. It looked great. It was very, very good water. What happened? Bayachad, along comes one guy, the kashar chevel bechevel, and he tied rope to rope, v'nima b'nima, and a cord to a cord, a thread to a thread, mishicha b'mishicha, and he kept making a longer rope and thread, v'dalai menu v'shata, and he used a bucket and he drew water from the bottom of the well, and everyone was able to drink. Everyone started scooping out water from that well and drinking. Okay, so that's the rest of the pasuk has to do with Yehuda in the beginning of Parshat Vayigash. But what's the Ibn Ezra telling us? Tachbulot sound like a negative thing. Tachbulot is probably the best word in English is strategies. But he says it's something even more than that. He says it's related to the word chevel because you have to dig deep down to bring out from yourself or from another person, or the other person will do it for you to help bring out something in you in order to bring forward the chokhmah, the wisdom, the knowledge, and all these things we've been talking about until now. And that is, I think that's actually a very, very cool kind of way to look at that. Let me bring this back down. I want to keep on this screen here. It's a little easier to see. Okay. So he says, Lahavin mashal u'melitza. I kind of not skimmed over, glossed over it before. These two words, I said they're pretty similar. Mashal u'melitza. Mashal is a parable, is a proverb, and the melitza we said was an epigram. What is that? What does that mean? Okay. So a mashal in this case. Okay, let me back up. One thing you're going to hear about in this book a lot is what's called the mashal and nimshal. Mashal means the actual proverb. The nimshal is what it's trying to get you to. What is it trying to compare to? Here's an example that's not from here. Something you may know already from Sefer Melachim, Sefer Shmuel. David HaMelech, in the story with David and Bathsheba, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, and Uriah HaChitti was Bathsheba's husband at the time. Very difficult story, narrative to understand. And I've taught it more than one time, and there are some amazing commentaries that make it clear. But in any case, it's still a black mark on David. And Hashem sends Natan, David's prophet, to tell him he's messed up. Now, Natan didn't walk in and go, "Hey, King David, what's up with you? What did you do?" Instead, he tells him, gives him a mashal. He gives him a parable. The mashal being, he said, there's a man who was poor and he had one little lamb, and there's a really rich man who wants to make a feast, and he steals the lamb of the poor man, and on and on and on and on. And David says, this man is subject to the death penalty. He did a horrible thing from stealing that one lamb from that one poor person. And Natan Navi turns around and says to David, Atahaish, you're the man. And David responds, there's no but, I could have, what I should have, what do you mean? It's just chatati, I sinned. I did something terribly wrong, okay? If you want to understand more of that go learn that when you want. But what the mashal is the story about the rich man and the poor man and the sheep and the one sheep and the many sheep. That's called the mashal. The nimshal is that which it is compared to, what's coming to have you understand. And that is that David was the rich man and Uriah Hachiti was supposed to be the poor man. He had one wife and David had many wives. And that was the mashal. So that's the mashal and nimshal. The melitza is more of a metaphorical term. So instead of a story or a proverb or a parable, melitza is more of a metaphor. The Lagon, actually in the Malbim say a little bit differently. They said that mashal and melitza are really like the mashal and nimshal. They have a different perspective on it, but that's okay. Elu divrei Elokim chayim. What does that mean? What I just said. People throw around terms like that. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. These and these are the words of the living God. Throughout the Talmud, throughout Jewish history, there have been disagreements between the rabbis and how they interpret things. And, you know, the old joke that one guy thinks he's right, the other guy thinks he's right, and they go to the rabbi says, you're both right. How can we both be right? But when it comes to Torah, you have the opportunity that you could look at the same thing from two different perspectives, and you both could be right and say, Elu ve'elu, both these, the way you approach it, the way he approaches it, what the words of Hashem, that he wanted us to be able to see all those aspects. There's an opinion that says that when Moshe Rabbeinu was told that when Bnei Yisrael crossed, this last week's parasha, when the Bnei Yisrael crossed the Jordan River and go into the land of Israel, in the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua, that when it says they had to write them Ba'er Hetev, that he didn't mean 70 languages, according to some opinions it meant 70 languages, but rather it meant 70 different approaches to everything in Torah. How they wrote it on some stones and that, don't ask me. I have no idea. But in any case, that's what's talking about over here is mashal u'melitza can mean either that you have the mashal and nimshal, and you have these different metaphors, or mashal and nimshal. For our purposes, at this point, it won't make any difference at this point. Divrei chachamim chidotam. What are the chidotam? What are chidot? What are these riddles? Okay, there's some I've seen some translations say enigmas as well. So the Ibn Ezra tells us what's referring to is the usage of in the Torah. If you look in the Torah, you know that there are words that are called malay and words that are chaser. A word that's malay means it's spelled completely. Let's say it has a letter vav. Remember, in Hebrew, you can have just a dot on top of the word that has the O sound to it. Like, for example, look at this word here, navon. Okay? Vav nun bet, vav nun. So that's malay. It's full. Why? Because you have the letter vav, and you could, in theory, just have the dot. Chaser means it's missing the vav, just the dot. So according to Ibn Ezra, to Rashi, maybe in Ibn Ezra also. No, just Rashi. But the chidot that'll come up within Sefer Mishle actually will be intertwined to words that are malay and chaser. Like, why did Shlomo write this way? To teach us this lesson. Why did he write the same word at a different time this way? To teach us a different lesson. Those are built-in riddles. Like, why do that? It's not the same thing as Ketiv and Kri. Ktiv and Kri is something else. That's way the word is written one way and it's pronounced a different way. The classic example is Shem Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, like you have over here. We don't pronounce that the way it looks. We pronounce it and say Ado and Nai, or in Hebrew, you just say Hashem. So there's another possibility that we have these chidot. According to the Vilna Gaon, what are the chidot? It's agadata that Shlomo is giving us hints. Remember, Shlomo knew everything. He knew everything that was going to be written as well. So all the things that eventually would find their way into the agadata, which is the stories and legend and lore that find in Midrash and eventually find in the Gemara, that it's these kinds of stories that are going to find their way into Sefer Mishle as well, that he'll use those to penetrate our hearts as well. Come back down here. I just want to say this. Chochma musar evilim bazu. I want to talk about that for a moment. This last line. Fools despise wisdom and discipline. What does that mean? We know maybe it's a Grimm's fairy tale. I don't remember. That grapes were spoiled anyways. They didn't want the grapes because they can't have them. So what a fool, what does it mean he despises wisdom? Who despises? You don't really hate wisdom. Something that is unimportant to a person, something they couldn't care less about, they're willing to just make fun of. They're willing to fill of derision and despise and toss it aside. If someone were to get into a discussion with me about something in high mathematics, I'm not so good at low mathematics, high mathematics, I'd be bored out of my mind unless they're really, really good at explaining what they're trying to tell me. I wish I wish I were good at math, at high level math, because it's if you don't think that's chokhmat Hashem, you're wrong. Of course, it's chokhmah. We say someone made a great point. I heard a couple of years ago, said some mathematician comes up with this unbelievable theory, or you talk about someone like an Einstein or Hawking, all these brilliant minds, they discovered these things. What we forget is, and wow, that's unbelievable, is the one who made that in the first place is Hashem. That's where the brilliance starts. So when a person couldn't care less, let's say a person can't, let's put it on a very basic level. A person is very poor and they can't afford meat. They can't afford meat for Shabbat, let's say, and people around them are buying meat and they barely have enough to buy macaroni. Because who needs meat anyways, right? So in a sense, this is what Shlomo is saying. Even for those people who despise Chokhmah, who push it aside, who push away Musar, I can help them as well. Let's take a look. We go down here. I want to concentrate on one more pasuk still, and that is a pasuk you more than likely all know. It's also a pasuk that has halachic ramifications. Shema. This is the next pasuk Zion. Chet. Sorry. Shema b'ni musar avicha, al titosh Torah timecha. Now he has finished the first few psukim, giving us the introduction to the book. He's already told us, and I told you too many times already, in both the introduction and tonight, who the book is for, what the book can do, how we're going to, tachlis, let's get to it. One more story, sorry. In Chicago, when I was the rabbi of the shul, so between Mincha and Marv, I would give a little talk of halacha between the Mincha and Marv. So it would be after Shkia, and after sunset, we go into Marv. And it came the time of year of Sirat HaOmer, and there's a book called Usfartem Lachem. And the book has every day something about the Sfira. And he has an introduction about what the book is about. And I figured, okay, I'll spend the first few days, go just read the introduction. And I can see people's eyes are glazing over. And one of my former teachers, Rabbi Reuven Levinson, Zichrono Livracha, he came over to me one night after Marv. He used to call me Zevi. I loved it. Zevi, it's boring. It's boring. So you don't want to belabor something. I think we've already understood now what this book in general is about. So let's take a look at this one very critical pasuk. Shema b'ni musar avicha v'al titosh Torah timecha. My son, heed the discipline of your father. Do not forsake the instruction of your mother. Notice it doesn't say the Torah of your mother. It says the instruction of your mother. Taken on very basic face value. This pasuk means that you listen to your parents, both in terms of how you act, in terms of ethics, and in terms of how you act in general instruction in life. Now, what does that mean? There's a lot there in this pasuk. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the halachic aspect of this pasuk, and next week, Bezrat Hashem, we'll see what the pasuk means a little bit more in depth. Because there are those who hold that the word avicha means Hashem, and imecha means Moshe Rabbeinu. Avicha is the stuff that is Torah shebichtav, the written law, and Torah timecha is Moshe's Torah shebe'al peh that Hashem gave him. What does this pasuk though have to do with halacha? You will hear one of the reasons you've heard this, besides that it's a famous song, different tunes, is that it has a halachic aspect. When there is a family custom, give you an example, talk about kitniot. Forget what a person's opinion might be, if it's a good minhag, a bad minhag, a ridiculous minhag, whatever it might be. It's a minhag, it's a custom. So people who know me that I went from Ashkenazi to Sfaradi over the years will call me up and say, can I just change my minhag? They're hoping I would say, yeah, sure, go ahead. Well, I don't. I can't just tell someone who's Ashkenazi, who I may not think it's a good minhag, but it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they have the right to change the minhag. I said, unless you have some compelling reason, you can't just change your minhag. It doesn't work that way. Why? Why is it so important? Well, minhag avotenu biyadenu. The Gemara uses this expression a few times that the minhag, the custom of our forefathers, is in our hands. But what does that mean? Where does that come from? This pasuk. This pasuk is telling us one of the general meanings of this pasuk is halachic ramification, that you have to follow your family's minhag unless there's a compelling reason to not. And there are reasons, like how did I become Sfaradi and do all that I do, made massive differences in certain areas of halacha. Maybe I'll discuss that at a different time. But if those are your family's customs, it also is a communal thing. If you come from another community, you move to a new community, and your custom was X, but the community's custom is Y, you have to follow the community's custom, because that becomes, so to speak, your parent in this community. It's not black and white like that always, but there are certain aspects to it. So what I'm going to do is leave it off here. We'll talk a little bit more about the halacha aspect of it next week, Bezrat Hashem, and then we'll talk about a little bit more in depth in this. Now, you'll notice just as this preview, there's a couple of psukim here in black, and then a number of psukim here in red. And this is, when we get to it, is what the expectations that someone might try to entice a sinner to do. And it sounds extremely radical and like lots to talk about here. Okay, Bezrat Hashem. So I wish you all a good night, a Shavua Tov, and Besorot Tovot.